Welcome to the Infinite Life with Katische Haberfield. I'm a quantum soul therapist, and I'd like to take you on a transformative journey exploring the mysteries of the soul, past lives, and infinite existence. Through over 60 regression case studies, mediumship interviews, and fascinating discussions with interesting human beings, uncover what it means to be a human facing duality on Earth whilst embracing the true nature of reality, non-duality, and unconditional love.
When we talk about legacy, if it's just simply ego, which it does happen in certain stratas of society because there's different rules in every level of society, but if it's just that I bought a sports team or I bought another sports team, it's got to be deeper than that because that alone is empty. And so I think when we talk about values, it's again, it's how do you define your values? So if you even get it down to 3 or 4, that's amazing. Now, here's where it gets emotional is if you have the opportunity to lean in and develop them every week, oh, life gets rich then. It's not just, am I racing to my death or is it just another day? Oh no, when you start to develop your values and lean into them, oh my gosh, that's like a bittersweet, holy cow, I've checked that off my list of goals this week, and those goals are like passionate.
And I think probably what you might experience, I'm only guessing, is that we can get to the point and we're like, are my values mine or are they my mum's? Are they my husband's?
Yes. Yeah. And that's a part of the peeling the onion process. I think that is a part of the discovery process. And just like on your podcast, you peel the onion to discover past lives and past life regression. I think that when somebody looks at their own life, how much of their identity is their own compared to their parents, and then to pull that apart and to say, okay, this is the identity that I'm stepping into. That again, that gets exciting because it's theirs, and there is something that's very linked between legacy and one's identity. That is, and so even from a spiritual perspective, like if you talk about business owners, and one of the things they say is, okay, now I've sold my business for millions. Now what? Well, one of the things you talk about is the spiritual aspect. Who are we in God? Who are we in the angels or whatever somebody deems to be their context for spirituality? And I think it's the same thing when you discover your own value separate from your parents. It's like all of a sudden, it's like life becomes refreshing again. Like, this is mine. If you talk about personal agency, it's like when it's yours, oh, it's good.
Angelina Carleton is the founder of Legacy Planning, a published author and a retreat facilitator. She's also the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast on Spotify, as well as Legacy Planning, a resource library, a YouTube channel for conversations around designing holistic legacies. She domiciles in Beverly Hills, California, USA with her husband Daryl and their English bulldog, Darla. She was trained as a co-active training coach in 2014 and is a US-based advisor with Americans Welcome Switzerland.
Welcome back to the Infinite Life podcast with Katische Haberfield. This week we have the lovely Angelina Carleton coming from America. Angelina, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here, Katische.
Angelina is a fellow podcaster and she has an amazing YouTube channel which is all about your legacy. And it is a resource collection of the most amazing interviews you will find about the topic of legacy. And one of the things that I noticed and have been noticing when I sit down and watch Angelina's interviews, which are similar in length to the interviews on this channel and this podcast, because they're not the short ones, they're a nice long 1 hour or a little bit more interviews, so they go in depth, is that how, despite the fact that my podcast is a so-called spiritual podcast and Angelina's is a holistic legacy podcast, we're basically talking about the same thing in different language. And so what prompted me to say was, okay, I've been doing a series at the moment about midlife, be that you define it as your 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever it is. And there are many things that happen in midlife. We question where we've been, where we're going to, what we do for the world, career-wise, what our contribution has been to date. And when we return home to the light or heaven or whatever you want to call it in your tradition, how will people remember us and how do we want to be remembered? And that for me opened a can of worms. And so I thought, who better to ask about how does one even start to process those thoughts about what is legacy? What is my legacy? How do I even approach the topic? Was an expert, and that's you, Angelina.
Wonderful.
So I guess the first question I have for you is, what is legacy planning and how did you get into it professionally?
Sure. First of all, I want to start off by sharing thank you for the acknowledgement about my podcast. I did start it a couple of years ago, but I started my coaching and consulting practice about a decade ago in 2014. And at that time, nobody was talking about legacy. Perhaps the estate planners or the certified public accountants, but it wasn't in the public consciousness as it is much today. I posted recently on Facebook and LinkedIn that my podcast is now in the top 5%, whether that's in society and culture or overall. So there's been more of an interest in it. I don't know if that's because of COVID or the other inciting events in people's lives that now have people thinking about this topic. I got into it originally. This was a story, and I've shared it a couple of times, and I'm just going to be raw and authentic compared to sugarcoating it, was I had a prior career as a commercial real estate broker. So I think the year was 2011 or 12, and I was invited to a 6-plated private luncheon. It was in Bel Air on West Sunset Boulevard in West Los Angeles, and the topic was private prisons. And it hadn't dawned on me that is a product type like multifamily apartments, like hospitality hotels. So I'm looking at this PowerPoint presentation, because if anyone has been in business, you've sat through many a PowerPoint presentation. And I'm looking to the left and my right, and I'm thinking, okay, well, what if I don't want my legacy to be based off of the suffering and misery of other people? There can be stocks and bonds and a bunch of different financial vehicles, but in terms of the quality of one's life purpose, their connection, their meaning, what do they step on other people's backs? And again, I'm looking to my left and my right, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to go onto the internet, and I'm sure I can find a coach and consultant that can help me design a legacy. And what I found instead are coaches that could help somebody design a business plan, lose weight, stop smoking, double their income. But there was like nobody when it came to this idea of creating an intentional life. It's also known as life planning, but again, life planning is segregated into this world of financial planning. And so it's a very small niche conversation, but it hadn't reached the public consciousness. So I think that the reason I started was because I didn't see a void being filled out there. So I thought about it again in like the year 2013. How can I, you talk about midlife and doing an about phase. So in 2013, I would have been 33 years old. I'm 44 now. And so at that time, I thought, okay, what do I do? I can't just jump into another industry. I got to go back to school. How do I figure that out? So anyways, I sold enough commercial real estate that I was able to do all of the education that the Coactive Training Institute offered and found mentors. And I just started with workshops and retreats and finding the family offices and the individuals that are interested in this topic. And does it help to have wealth? Yes. But having said that, 2/3 of today's affluent are self-made. It's not as if somebody just has to be rich in order to design a legacy. Not at all. They can choose to be a small business owner. They can choose to be a part of a family business. They can choose to be middle class and to still say, with the resources that I have, including emotional resources, maybe I want to end some generational curses. Maybe I want to clean up my past lives to finally be free and live into my values. So one of the questions you had shared with me in our preamble was, where does somebody start? And I always say, let's start with your values.
That's a hard one too. It's quite an emotional topic, isn't it? For me, you can see straight away, as soon as I start talking about it, you get emotional. You're like, how do you define your values? Because you can do it with a book. You can go buy something, download a resource and do it yourself. And you're like, I'm not sure if I've got it. And I think it's not until it makes you cry or it makes you get passionate that you've got your values, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it needs to be a conversation. I think that there's a lot of PDFs. They call it, what do they call it these days? It's like you get a landing page and then you give the informational PDF, and all that's great. But there's something to be said about a human conversation on a consistent, regular basis, whether that's within the context of a family meeting, whether that's a weekly coaching session. Because you're right, when we talk about legacy, if it's just simply ego, which it does happen in certain stratas of society, because there's different rules in every level of society. But if it's just that I bought a sports team or I bought another sports team, it's got to be deeper than that, because that alone is empty. And so I think when we talk about values, it's, again, yeah, it's how do you define your values? So if you even get it down to 3 or 4, that's amazing. Now, here's where it gets emotional, is if you have the opportunity to lean in and develop them every week, oh, life gets rich then. It's not just, am I racing to my death, or was it just another day? Oh no, when you start to develop your values and lean into them, oh my gosh, that's like a bittersweet, holy cow, I checked that off my list of goals this week, and those goals are like passionate.
And I think probably what you might experience, I'm only guessing, is that we can get to the point and we're like, are my values mine, or are they my mum's? Are they my husband's?
Yes. Yeah. And that's a part of the peeling the onion process. I think that is a part of the discovery process. And just like on your podcast, you peel the onion to discover past lives and past life regression. I think that when somebody looks at their own life, how much of their identity is their own compared to their parents, and then to pull that apart and to say, okay, this is the identity that I'm stepping into. That again, that gets exciting, because it's theirs. And there is something that's very linked between legacy and one's identity that is. And so even from a spiritual perspective, like if you talk about business owners, and one of the things they say is, okay, now I've sold my business for millions, now what? Well, one of the things you talk about is the spiritual aspect. Who are we in God? Who are we in the angels, or whatever somebody deems to be their context for spirituality? And I think it's the same thing when you discover your own values separate from your parents. It's like all of a sudden, it's like life becomes refreshing again. Like, this is mine. If you talk about personal agency, it's like when it's yours, oh, it's good.
Yeah, and I think that it must be empowering, especially if you think that it can redefine which way you go. You might think you might be done with business life, but you finally find a value, and then suddenly you're like, oh, hang on, I want to start something totally new that I never expected. Or, it could open up whole new businesses, new charities, new avenues. I'm sure you've seen lots of examples of that, where people just suddenly get that fire and they're like, I didn't expect to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think anytime somebody, and I'm going to want to ask you about your values in a moment, Katish, even though you told them to me, I think about 2 years ago, but I don't have that video fresh in front of me. I think that when somebody does get to lean into any of their values that they didn't have an opportunity to lean into before, yeah, life gets very fun and interesting. And again, it's we talk about personal agency. When we are growing up, there's like a school structure that keeps us accountable. When we get older, and you're talking about midlife, whether somebody sells their company or they do a pivot in their career, where's that personal agency? There's no teacher with a ruler that's about ready to smack your hands to say, you got to be disciplined. Here's the framework and the structure. That gets lost. And so I'm going to plug coaching right now. I think that is the power of coaching. When somebody shows up once a week and they're held accountable, what's next for you? Like, where are you now? Explore that. Yeah. Like, where are you now? Yeah. What's real now?
Exactly. And I think the other example for people who are listening here, and they're like, I've just been doing family caring, for example, and they put the word just in there. Yeah, your kids are left home. Boom, that's actually a really big time for women to go, my kids have left home. Who am I as an identity? I've done what I valued, which was family. Maybe that was their number one authentic value, family. And now that those precious jewels have gone on and gone to university or in their own life, I need to see what I want to do with those values and what I want to create now, because you're in your creative time, right? You've moved from the nurturer to the middle life for women is about creativity. So yeah, it's about saying legacy starts from now if you're somebody who's at that stage as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And for yourself in the mother capacity, I don't have children, so I can speak to this for you, that I think that in a world today that can feel sometimes ruthless as well as stressful, to be able to, what I call, distill the best of the last 18 years with your children, that's priceless. That's bigger than a gratitude journal. I don't mean to sound morbid, but I'm going to be morbid for a moment. Let's say tomorrow you disappear. Let's say tomorrow you have a heart attack, God forbid, okay? It's doing the investment now, even just starting with the top 50 best memories that you've shared with them in the last 18 years, that's even written down for them. That's something that they can treasure. I think I've shared in prior podcasts, I had a great grandfather about a century ago, Herbert Carleton, on my father's side, on the paternal side. And he was very successful during the Great Depression. He drove multiple cars, had multiple Cadillacs, multiple homes. He had a maid, on and on. He sent my grandfather, Richard Carleton, to Harvard for his PhD. Why didn't he write anything down for me? I'm not saying that just because he did well in business, that why didn't his wife write anything down? But there was something that was missing. So something as simple as a list of 50 things can be something that's treasured a century from now. But I
Mm.
think part of it is that people don't think that is important. It's like when I interviewed my parents during COVID for 10 or 11 hours each, an hour a day for each conversation. That was when the best conversations happened. Yeah. So I think that this idea of roots and the best of our roots, of what's meaningful, needs to be distilled. And again, a lot of times people think, A, it's not important, or what I have to say isn't good enough. And it's gold. Speaking to what you had mentioned right now, you're in a pivotal life point where you're midlife and you have an invitation to reinvent yourself. I think designing a legacy is also incredibly important, because you now have the space and the freedom to say, okay, these are, let's say, my top 4 values. And this is the point where I'd like to ask you, what do you think they are?
Authenticity has to be my number one.
Okay.
Yeah, authenticity is what I would call a soul value.
Okay.
When I've gone back through past lives, it's been the thing that has been something intolerable, where my ability to express or be perceived has not been received, or I have surrounded myself with people who didn't see the true me. So I can see that in other lifetimes and in this lifetime too. I don't tend to be able to stomach inauthentic people. And people are like, yeah, you're raw and real. You get what you don't you? And I'm like, yeah, there's not really much of a mask there. You know what I'm
You cut to
thinking?
the chase. Yeah.
You know where you stand with me. And very rarely do I put on a mask to show a different side of me. So yes, authenticity, I'd have to say, is a soul level theme. In this lifetime, family, values. Family has been my number one priority. And that was also for a reason, because in other lifetimes I have not been family orientated at all. So I think this time it was particularly healing for me to to be who I have been, to heal that part of myself, whereas in other lifetimes I have been rather ruthless when it came to family.
Okay. So I'm hearing family authenticity. I'm also hearing healing.
Yeah. Yes, obviously healing. Yeah, healing. Yeah, I never thought of that as a value, to be honest. Yeah, but yeah, healing. Clearly.
Okay. Anything else?
Uh, my brain just said trust. Yeah, I would say trust is a word there. Yeah.
Trusting what's real, or what would you add?
Uh, I think it would be trusting yourself, trusting your intuition, trusting your guidance, but then also trusting yourself, which links back to the authenticity in the knowledge of who to surround yourself in, who to seek advice from, who to have relationships with. So many levels of trust that you need. But I think probably right now for me, pivotally, has been trust in intuition and inner guidance and relationship with the spirit world, because that's a really difficult thing to trust. It's a process.
The-
Yeah, it's the theme. Probably, if you ask me, if we could fast forward to the end of my life, it would probably be making the invisible visible.
Okay. Oh, I like
And
that.
yeah, and that obviously works with healing is invisible, but it's visible outcomes. All the ghost work that I've done is making ghosts, which are human beings who are invisible, visible by sending them to the light, working with emotions. Emotions are invisible, but they're visible. Yeah, I think it's, bringing that from underneath to the light.
Yeah. We can't see the wind, but we can see the effects of the wind.
That's right. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things I think when somebody is designing a legacy, it's not just passing on the values as clearly, intentional, and consistently, but I think it's also like what you just spoke of. It's if you're able to, let's say if you create a chart and you have 4 boxes, and box 1 is family, box 2 is authenticity, let's say box 3 is healing, and then box 4 is trusting yourself, your guidance, your intuition, and you ask yourself each day, let's say as a part of your morning routine, how can I lean into these further? What opportunities present themselves or could present themselves? Let's say for healing you would like to swim with dolphins, and let's say it's within your budget to do it, and then taking that leap of faith to do it.
Yeah. 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 And then that's very satisfying, isn't it? Yeah. When you can do that.
Yeah,
Very satisfying.
that's where midlife becomes not boring. That's where midlife becomes fulfilling.
Yes. And I think there's a lot of people who do get scared by the previous couple of generations' definition of midlife, because they don't want to be the knitting socks granny watching the TV with a budget that can only be a cup of tea and a biscuit. Do you know what I mean? They don't want to be the retirement home dwellers. They don't want to turn off their brain at 50 or 60. They want to have adventures and tap into their own inner wisdom.
Yeah, yeah. I think what you're referring to is the courage to step outside of one's comfort zone.
Yeah.
So either it can come from a place of frustration or it can come from a place of inspiration.
Mm.
And sometimes it comes from frustration, and that's okay. Sometimes it comes from a place of pain of I just spent the last 20 years doing what my parents wanted me to do in the career of blah 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 and raising children, and that was wonderful, but now I'd like to finally live my life. Like it can come from a place of pain as the what I call the inciting event. Like it might not be a car accident, it might not, but it could be something like, okay, I've just lived a life of silent desperation the last 20 years, whatever that thing is. And so it can come from a variety of different motivations. The other thing I wanted to mention is that sometimes people can invest in parts of their lives. Like it could be their health, their diet, their exercise, getting an exercise coach. It could be money. They could find somebody that could be their bookkeeper, somebody that is their tax planner, their financial planner, etc. It could be relationships. They can, again, set aside time to buy books. But then when it comes to the legacy, either what motivates them is that there is a generational family of wealth and they don't want to, quote, screw it up because the second and third generation don't have the discipline and the habits and the state of mind to carry it forward, teacups to teacups and so forth. Or it can be that they realize their legacy is really important. A lot of times people have limiting beliefs around their legacy. Who am I to design a legacy? Who am I to value my life so much to swim with the dolphins? Or they can say, like you had brought up before, like with parents and grandparents, then I'm the first of my generations to design a legacy. My parents never talked about this at the kitchen table, the dining room table, the holiday meals.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, somebody who's really inspiring is Louise Hay. She didn't
Okay.
create her legacy until like 60. Do you know what I mean?
You
I
have to
find
be
it
ready.
really, yeah, you have to be, I find it very inspiring when somebody who just is going through life and then something happens. And then from that moment forward, they're like, I'm going to do this. I'm not going to let age hold me back. I'm going to create something totally different. And then you see the product because you're 20 or 30 years behind them and you're like, wow, look at what they produced. And
Yeah.
it's like authors who write 80 books, like Dr. Wayne Dyer or anybody that you can think of that is a prolific writer. And you're like, they're on fire. The rest of us humans might write one book in our lifetime, and it was a struggle to do that. But they've found that spark, and then they can't stop.
Yeah, I think when somebody rides the wave of the momentum, whether the momentum is external or internal, and I do want to bring up Louise Hayes for a moment, You Can Change Your Life, and the other titles and so forth. I think that when somebody gets older, especially midlife, like I'm 44 now, I don't know what your age is, I think that the asset of time, it just dawns on you, okay, half of it's done. If I have a conversation, and I just had a conversation today with a 21-year-old, and he takes his life for granted, he takes time for granted, but time is one of those things that you can't get back. So whether it's Dr. Wayne Dyer or Louise Hayes, when somebody realizes, shoot, I've got this wisdom because I've had a few trials in my life, I'm going to do something with this. And they're ready for it. Like, I think with design and legacy, there's two prerequisites. Number one, you have to want it. And number two, you have to be ready for it. Yeah. And I think a 21-year-old can be ready. It depends on what their life experiences are. If they've been coddled by their parents and they haven't lived life yet, I don't know what type of legacy they are going to design. It might be theoretical. Where there's a will or an internal fire, there's a way. But if they are apathetic and they have little responsibility in their life, they might not care about designing a legacy. But if I go back to our preamble regarding being in the middle of one's life, I think somebody has a little bit of a consciousness regarding the asset of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And to answer your question, 49.
Okay.
At Christmas, I'm 49, so 48 right now, 49 at Christmas. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. It's the big 50. I think for anyone that hits the big 50s.
Yeah, I'd also add, if there's been an inciting event in someone's life, let's say somebody got into a car accident, or they got arrested, or they went into the hospital for whatever reason, and there was a window of time, whether that's 5 days or whatever that window is, and they start to think about, okay, well, if I disappear, who's going to care? And some people that matters, other people it doesn't matter. But I think that's a very sobering realization of, will I leave something behind? Do I care to leave something behind? Some people are just going to be followers in their life. Not everybody wants to design a legacy, but those who do typically are entrepreneurs, or they have something that they feel good about in their life. Like they've created a business. They're connected to resources where they're not necessarily in just survival mode, where they've got that space to create, or they want to create. And
I was just thinking, Mike, I've got one son who's in grade 12 this year, so he's off to university next year. And how fabulous would it be if, instead of just racing them through these degrees to become lawyers or whatever, that there was like a subject where they're like, let's talk about how at the start of your studies you can think about your vision for your life. That would be cool, wouldn't it? Because then you're not flustering around with your degree. You're like, sure, you might have a design that you want to be a lawyer or whatever, but it's such a broad thing. And to sit down to have a child at a university or something that goes, let's start that framework so that we don't have to do it today, but we can start thinking whilst we're planning this grand career. I think that would be amazing as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the things that happens, though, is that public as well as private universities oftentimes make great employees. They don't necessarily have the goal of backwards planning. Yeah. So I think that conversation either happens at home, or it happens with positive role models, or it happens with a really good coach. So
True.
I want to bring up the expression, and you may have heard this: when it comes to money, nobody cares more about your money than you do. And I'm going to say nobody cares more about your legacy than you do.
Yeah, for sure. And there was one thing that I mentioned to you prior to the podcast. It's this whole thing of navigating your life so that you can understand that when you do get to the end, a legacy, you will leave a legacy regardless of whether you've planned it or not, in the way that you've acted, the way that you have treated people, the way that you've worked out your financials and your estate, the way, whether you have or not, and that what you craft of yourself will also potentially be different to what the world remembers you as, and the way that your family remembers you.
Yeah. One of the things that we chatted about over Facebook in the preamble to today's conversation, you had brought up Marilyn Monroe. And there's a public as well as a private persona and not just with herself, as you had mentioned, this blonde bombshell, a kind of a sex symbol of Hollywood as an icon, but then privately her interest in helping children. You also brought up an actor, Matthew Perry of the hit show Friends. And I think that when somebody either comes across celebrity or wealth, there's like the front side of the hand and then there's the back side of the hand. And I think all of us have that to a certain extent, but obviously with the more resources or success or money, success and money, like failure, are magnifiers. And so when somebody has, again, exponential resources and they're thrust into a limelight, whether that's by their choosing or not by their choosing, I think you had brought up this question of how much influence or how much control do we have over it? And here's my answer. I think that as much as you're willing to show up every week and develop your values, because at least Marilyn Monroe did the efforts to help children. At least Matthew Perry did what he did to help those that struggled with substance abuse. But if he had never shown up, he would have just been the depth of a tea plate saucer. I hate to be so crass,
it's true.
but there's some celebrities that they don't care about giving back. They don't care about service to others or the struggle of the human experience. And so if I even go back to thinking about Marilyn Monroe, she probably created from a place of pain. She was an orphan. She had experienced a number of handlers. She even herself was fed drugs. I wasn't there to verify it 3 times, but we've seen some of the movies and the documentaries of how she was treated because she was a moneymaker. She was a vessel, just like Britney Spears is managed today with being a ward of the court and her dad and all the people that are around her. So even if I bring up somebody like Britney Spears, what will her legacy be? I think when that individual, when it comes to their personal development, can step into no matter their struggles in life. And Britney Spears, just like Marilyn Monroe, they've suffered. And I can bring that up for even women, regardless of the decade or the country. Women are still second-class citizens in a lot of ways. Is that changing today because there's now more of an appreciation of the feminine? Yes, because there's an imbalance in the world. I don't want to say that since Queen Elizabeth passed on, that there's an excess of male energy, but I think the feminine is starting to have value in a patriarchal society. So going back to Marilyn Monroe or even Britney Spears, I think that if I were to sit down and help her design a legacy, it's Britney, what are your values? Separate from the loud influence of your handlers or the fans.
Mm.
And I think even with Katy Perry had a breakdown. Katy Perry's a singer, where she had said, oh, they just love me for my facade. Well, she's not the only person that has a facade. There's executives that have a facade. You spoke about authenticity before. Some people, whether it's through trauma and like the mind becomes like a beehive of personalities, and it might not be as extreme as multiple personality disorder. It's just maybe they've been such a people pleaser their entire lives that now designing a legacy is that invitation for them to be authentic. And that could be the scariest thing they've ever done in their life, to put their stake in the ground.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see what happens Taylor Swift's legacy, for example, most successful business person, singer ever, practically. And I guess with somebody like a Taylor Swift of the world, when you get to having that much impact on people, literally your lip gloss influences purchases, and anything that you say, you have to be so careful, but you've also got access to so much money. You have to go back to your values, don't you? Where do I want to use this?
Yes. And I will say regarding Taylor Swift, there's been a lot of wins that have tried to knock her down and knock her out, whether it's her standing up to Apple Music, lawsuits that she has faced. Yes, there's a lot of little girls and women of all ages that are inspired by her. And I don't know if she is the reincarnation of Beethoven, because like Beethoven, he would hear a melody in his head. And similar with Taylor Swift, she could be alone and she gets the gist of something. You talk about trusting your intuition, and she gets like rhythms and melodies in her head. And similar with Janet Jackson, who carries around a tape recorder. And when that comes, that download from the universe, they capture that. Yes, I think if somebody like Taylor Swift leans into her values, then that becomes a force stronger than the outside bullies of Kanye West ripping that award from her hands publicly on a stage, and all of the ex-boyfriends that have talked smack about her, even if she's written songs about them.
Yeah, it's also that, which you must also deal with as well, as working through to see that sometimes, what if what you've already done is a legacy so great that you can't see it, that you don't need to, you need to learn to appreciate yourself and what you've done. For example, the Taylor Swift with the Apple Music, for example, is a legacy in itself. And sometimes we put these standards way so high that our legacy might be being kind to ourselves for the next 10 years in our life, to just not drive so hard to do another thing in your legacy, but to have a legacy of self-kindness is the next chapter.
Sure, absolutely. And I might go back to values and say that's embodying your values.
Yes, yes. Yeah, embodying it. Yeah. It's such a meaty topic.
It is, because we live in this culture where it's countercultural to live into our values. The norm would be, I'm going to give in. The norm would be, I'm going to follow the crowd. The norm would be, okay, Apple Music, you just want to take 75% of my intellectual property. I'll just roll over. I'll be demure, supportive, and helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think to say to oneself, and when one looks in the mirror and say my values, and I am valuable enough to live into my values. Mic drop. One of the things I wrote down for today's conversation is also defining the stakes. And the stakes could be regrets on the final day. It could be those missed conversation, missed moments, missed goals, and also being able to manifest and document the here and the now. Like we spoke briefly about the last 18 years with your children, writing that list of the 50 best moments. Maybe it was at Bondi Beach in Australia. I don't know if you've been to Bondi Beach.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. It's in a different state, but yes, I used to live in Sydney.
Okay. I know James Packer went there.
There's another famous Australian with an interesting. Anyway, keep going. Yeah, I
He
could
was an
imagine being
family business, and he had a hard time standing up to his mother.
Yeah.
And
Talk
his
about
sister.
pressure there.
Yeah. So again, when you had raised the question of, are they my values or my parents' values? If I were to sit down with James Packer, I would say, time to develop you.
Yeah, clear. Very clear.
Yeah.
It's easy to see this when you're the onlooker, isn't it? But it's really hard to have the courage to look at yourself the same way that you could look at an onlooker at somebody else.
Yeah. This is where I'm going to plug the power of coaching again. That sometimes it's hard for us to step out of the movie and into the audience, as Indra Rinsler would say. And I think the power of coaching, if one is not just surrounded by yes people at any income level in society, then those are the truth tellers. I think that it's not just James Packer. There are many instances where there could be a helicopter parent, and there's an expression, don't kneecap the children, about kneecapping them. And I think that it's to live fully and not to just be within one's comfort zone. And I think even with James Packer, like many family businesses or generational families, there is this fear of, if you F it up, right?
Yeah. Imagine what it'd be like a Prince William. Or even Charles. Like,
how about Harry?
Yeah, Harry,
Yeah. So when you even talked about this idea of, like, okay, what if up to a certain point the past has been a legacy? I will agree with you regarding like somebody like Taylor Swift, but I think there's also something in the human soul that wants to grow and evolve, and we're a different person perhaps in each decade as we grow. Yeah. So I think one of the things, like when you talked before about, okay, how does somebody design a legacy? I think part of it is short-term goals. The other part is long-term goals. The short-term goals is, okay, I need to establish the foundation right now, but long-term goals is, survival aside, what is the big dream? What is the noble vision? What are the, not just noble values, but then what is that noble vision that exceeds my expectations of what's possible?
Yeah. And I think what you spoke to a few minutes ago about that what are the stakes?
Defining
could you speak
the stakes.
A bit more into that? Yeah.
I also call that agitating the problem.
That's a good visual.
Yeah. I think defining the stakes, again, if we look at assets, aren't just money. There's an asset of time. There's an asset of the potential. I think a part of coaching is selling potential to a client. And that potential is, there is a dream you have, a vision you have of what you'd like. And sometimes people know, sometimes they might not know. And you have to gently, I'm going to use a metaphor again of peeling the onion, because sometimes they might be afraid to say what that dream is. Just like
Mm.
they could be afraid to state what their basic needs are because at some point in the past they got ridiculed for speaking their needs, whether that's an emotional need, a physical need, or whatever. Maybe they were shamed in the past and shut down. So something as simple as inviting somebody to share what they would like their legacy to be. I think, again, if I go back to defining the stakes, what gets lost if you don't get to live into that or manifest that in this life? You've done regression work in past lives, then do you just come back again? You messed up that last opportunity. We're back here again.
Yeah, and the answer is yes. What you regret when you die is what creates your limiting beliefs and creates your urge to come back and fix it when actually there's no requirement to, because it's all just the mind. Limiting beliefs and karma is just the mind. So yes, the number one thing that I guess I hope that my podcast leaves as a legacy is that people can see these people revisiting their grief and their regrets so that they understand the importance of not doing that themselves, that it's unnecessary to finish your life with just a huge clipboard of regrets.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and when it comes to regrets, I think a lot of that is just fear-based. And is fear real? Absolutely. But there's also a point where, okay, fear win today. And that's a personal choice each morning. Because again, somebody has to be ready. I have a cousin, Carl Neville, across the pond. He's in England. He's a high-level Knights Templar. And he has said to me regarding Judgment Day, the question that will be asked is, did you do what you were supposed to do in this lifetime? It's not necessarily were you a nice person. Yes, karma does exist, but it's a, is it that you did what you needed to do? Did you do what was expected of you? I don't know what that is for you or for me. I just know that question is going to be brought up. And apparently 70 or 80% plus of the time, people get shot right back into another life because they don't get to go to the next level of the video game.
Yeah. And that is set of expectations that can be eased by understanding that your mind creates your reality and your karma. You don't have to have this whole thing where you create karma and go back around and keep taking the opposite roles or to learn. It's just you who's self-punishing yourself by saying, all right, I need to go back and fix that.
Yeah. And sometimes what we are born into, sometimes we're given the head start. Other times we are born into situations and there is a lot to work through and that baggage might not be ours. But when somebody gives us a gift, do we accept it? Because sometimes it might not be a gift. I bring that up because there's a movie called The Source Code, and there's a gentleman, he's an Army officer, and he has to go into Chicago and save the train. And that's the entire movie. He just keeps getting shot back in about like 15 times till he gets it right. And I bring that up because of this idea of backwards planning. Yeah, sometimes you might not know and you have to develop your sea legs. But in terms of backwards planning, I think even if we just write an obituary, it doesn't have to be a grim, scary, dark thing. And even legacy.com is a catalog of death. It doesn't have to be that in terms of if we think about, okay, so you're midlife right now, 49, about to turn 49, 48 at the moment. But if you were to do backwards planning, and let's say you guess that you'll live to 75, I don't know, I'm making up a number, maybe you'll live to 85, but it's writing that obituary of things. These are the next things I'd like to do, whether that's creating a university. You had been a professor at one time. Maybe you'll create an online university after swimming with the dolphins. I don't know.
Who knows? Who knows?
The other thing is, I think that when somebody designs a legacy, I think it's important to revisit it for 5 minutes each morning or each evening. How we go to sleep oftentimes determines how we wake up the next day in terms of mindset. Or if somebody can be a morning person, to look at their short and their long-term goals, their mission statement, their legacy vision, for just 5 minutes each morning, just to check in with it. So they don't forget. So they don't go back to what's called the land of familiar, which comes from a coach by the name of Franco Lombardo.
Yeah, okay. That's great advice. And it's often the simplest things that we just get swept away, don't we?
Yeah, I'll settle. That's the land of familiar.
Yeah. Angelina, there's so much that we could talk about. If there's any one last sort of thing that you could leave as a thought or a prompt, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say design your plan. It'll make you feel really proud. I think in terms of a call to action, just choose to take the first steps, whatever that looks like for you, whether that's retaining a coach, whether that is just writing down some short and long-term goals. For you, that list of 50 best memories with your children in the last 18 years.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think from an emotional standpoint, I think it's choosing to care because it's easier to be apathetic.
Yes. It is very easy to be apathetic. We're just, lean to, it's the challenge to just move away from the busyness and, take a breath and think about you.
Well, when we see a child prodigy go up to a piano and they make that piano sing of something that they can turn something ordinary into the extraordinary. I think the same thing can happen when one designs their legacy. And somebody says, oh, I didn't know all that was in there. It was, whether that was Marilyn Monroe or Matthew Perry or even Taylor Swift. And it's not just the famous and the rich. It's, again, 2/3 of today's affluent are self-made. It was a hunger inside of them, either because their parents couldn't afford to put food on the table, or they just they saw a void in the marketplace, but there was something inside of them that fueled them. And so I don't know what it is for you, Katische, but I'd love to have you send me an email in 1 week and let me know if you wrote a list of 50 things.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, good challenge. Good challenge. Thank you so much. It's provided a lot of food for thought. And the beautiful thing about is that you have designed a YouTube channel that has got so many resources that people can simply take the first step just to watch one of your podcast videos. And I know that there's one there about, which I haven't watched yet, which with, I can't remember if it was a lady or a gentleman, which was literally about memories and leaving a legacy of memories for your family and the importance of that one aspect. And then they can reach out to you on your website.
Yeah, absolutely. They can absolutely book a session, but I think I just want to close out by sharing that I think you're talking about Hale. She's in Los Angeles. I think it's again, I go to this idea of roots. When the next generation is coming up and they feel lost in this world, they can just know the best parts of their history, their heritage, whatever that thing is. That is one of the best investments, more than just a college fund or a CD or a financial portfolio. This is who you are, and you are valuable.
Yeah, beautiful. That's a lovely way to end it.
Yes.
Thank you, Angelina, for your time today. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
It is my pleasure, and I hope that you continue to make the invisible visible.
Thank you.